I'm J. Rachel Editon.
And I'm Miles Stokes.
And we're the hosts of Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men, a weekly podcast all about the ins, the outs, and the retcons of our favorite superhero soap opera.
We're also the hosts of Rachel and Miles Review the X-Men,
which you're watching right now,
where we talk about the X books that come out each week.
And man, we've got two really big ones this week.
Yeah, this is for November 4th, and our two issues are the ending of an era of X-Men and the beginning of the next one. So, cool little parallel right there. So, let's go for it. So let's start with our Brave New World. We'll start with Extraordinary X-Men #1, written by Jeff Lemire with pencils by Humberto Ramos, inks by Victor Olazaba, and colors by Edgar Delgado. And it's all right. I think I was expecting something to really blow me away, to come charging out the gates, and this doesn't exactly do that. It's good, it's promising, but it's also a little slow.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I liked about it, a lot that kind of left me cold. Starting with what I liked, I am so impressed with the art team on this book. Ramos is an artist who can be a really odd fit for some of the books he's been paired with in the past. I have not been a huge fan of his previous X-Men work, and I really, really liked him here. I don't know if it's a combination of him, the inker and the colorist, in concert, or what, but he's toned down a little bit in ways that support the storytelling while keeping his signature expressiveness, and I was really, really impressed.
Yeah, I've been a fan of Ramos' X-Men work for a long time. He did a run with, I believe, Mike Carey a number of years ago that I really dug. And you're right that this is definitely a little bit more chilled out. The characters look more like they're human-shaped, but he's still got this glorious expressiveness. I mean, seeing Magic's furious face, seeing Iceman look worried, seeing Colossus's monstrous physique in this pastoral landscape. This is what I really enjoy in comics art. It's being realistic where you want to and not worrying about it where you don't want to.
The trouble is that I feel like he doesn't have that much to work with. This issue is oddly toned down for all of those explosive moments. It's supposed to give a sense of crisis, but for me it kind of doesn't. There's a lot that's just sort of there. It's decompressed to the point of almost kind of a loss of urgency.
What it kind of reminds me of is the first few episodes of the Wolverine and the X-Men cartoon, which really are all about getting the band back together.
Yeah,
and that's what this is. It's Storm forming a team in this time of crisis, like a central X-Men team to fix things, to make things better, to defend mutant kind. We don't really know exactly what yet.
The problem is, while that'll work in a weekly serial, it's a lot harder to justify in a monthly or even semi-monthly comic, especially when you've only got 22 pages to play in. Wolverine and the X-Men, the cartoon, got off to a slow start in terms of the action, but there was still a lot going on and a huge amount of world building. We get some of that here, but dropping us into the middle of the crisis without the urgency just sort of feels like almost a cheat.
Well, so about that crisis. So as you may be aware, Marvel is starting all of their post-Secret Wars books, and yes, we know Secret Wars is still being published. Comics, whatever.
Yeah, the time overlap here is, I think, a big part of the problem. I feel like we don't have context we need.
Well, I think some aspects of it work. So, for instance, we hear about the Mpox, this disease based on the Terrigen Mists. It's affecting mutants and has made humans more paranoid of them. We know enough to get invested, but little enough to want to know more. Similarly, we have, Storm running X-Haven, where all these mutants are coming from around the world. Same kind of deal. Like, we're given little details here and there, so we're not totally lost, but the sense of mystery remains.
Yeah, and the big terrible thing that Cyclops did, or whatever happened.
See, that works for me a little less well.
Yeah.
Because I'm certainly curious as to just what Cyclops did to make things so horrible for mutants, but it almost feels like it's being withheld, I don't want to say out of spite, but in a way that doesn't serve the story so much as it is designed to pull readers to keep buying issues to see what happened. Overall, though, I think the 8-month gap is cool. I think the X-books were in a good ending point where we left them in the issue we'll cover after this, Uncanny X-Men 600. So it's not a bad way to start it. I talked about Wolverine and the X-Men and the parallels to this issue in terms of pacing, and one thing I will say is that show became incredible once it was firing on all cylinders, once that pre-constructive work was done. And that's what I'm hoping here, because we know Jeff Lemire can be an excellent, excellent writer. His Essex County is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And if he can bring that to this book, then I think we're going to have an X-Universe centerpiece that will be well worth it. If not, well, that would be unfortunate. But I'm feeling pretty optimistic despite this issue's flaws.
Yeah, likewise. I will say that this is off to a slow start, but as a series, I'm willing to withhold judgment. It's a strong creative team. It's got some very strong premises and characters to work with. And I'm really curious to see where it's going to go. Finally, and at long last, we have Uncanny X-Men number 600. And actually, before we review this, there's some other stuff we should probably talk about because that's going on this week, because it's kind of impossible, at least for me, to separate that from my read of this comic. As we've mentioned before on the podcast, Miles and I kind of have podcast versions of ourselves and real-life versions of ourselves, and there are a few conceits that don't carry over, and one of them is that podcast me always wears sunglasses. So I'm going to do something I have never done before here, and that is take them off.
Can I wear it?
Yeah, sure.
Sweet.
Because I kind of want to do this as real person me. As some of you already know, I came out as trans this week. That's a thing that's happening. I will link to the official announcement, such as it is, in the video text. For practical purposes, I'm going to be going mostly by J Rachel for purposes of professional continuity, and using neutral pronouns. And actually, we should probably take a minute and talk about how that's going to play out in terms of the podcast, because we've already gotten a few questions about it.
Yeah. So the first thing you will notice, or rather won't notice, is that for the next many episodes, nothing changes. In the future, I'm going to be referring to Jay largely as Jay and using neutral pronouns, they and their. Mm-hmm. But because we and our producer are both traveling a lot in the next couple of months, we actually have recorded way ahead at this point and sort of forgot about how the timing was going to play out.
Actually, it's going to be totally inconsistent because 83 is going to be the live episode that we're recording in Vegas next week. So anyway, it's going to be all over the place in November and December. Don't take anything we do then as precedent.
Right. As for the future of the podcast itself, well, first of all, we're not going anywhere.
Totally.
We're gonna keep doing this as long as we draw breath.
The title of the podcast might change in the long term, but for at least the immediate future, it's going to stay Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men. Again, I'm still using Rachel in my name for professional purposes. And honestly, renaming and rebranding is a huge pain, and things are complicated enough right now. So, yeah, it's been an intense week and a hell of a week to read through Uncanny X-Men 600 in, which we will get to in a moment. I guess we should probably get back to the comic with that.
Let's go for it, but first of all, everybody who has heard about this whole thing has been amazing. So, guys, thank you.
Like our friends and family and strangers on the internet have been really spectacular. And honestly, this is scary and weird, and it's really scary and weird doing it without sunglasses. Like, that feels like a much bigger deal. But knowing the community that we have and that we're talking to here makes a fairly fraught process a whole lot easier. So thank you for that. And I guess with that, back to the X-Men.
Back to the X-Men.
So let's actually now review Uncanny X-Men number 600. Written by Brian Michael Bendis, drawn by, in combination, I think, every artist who's been a regular on either Uncanny or All New X-Men in the last year and change. Ditto for colors, with roughly a zillion variant cover artists. This book has been a long time coming. It was originally solicited for this summer, early this summer, I think. It's finally out now, and it wraps up a whole lot of dangling threads from both All New and Uncanny X-Men.
Right, this is basically the conclusion to either and both of those arcs. So if you were just following one, this is still the end of that arc. If you were following both, then there's a lot to catch up on and read here.
And man, I liked it so much. Now, it breaks somewhat from the tradition of big milestone numbered issues in that it is absolutely and unquestionably not a standalone. Don't read this if you have not been following Uncanny and All New X-Men, because it is not going to make any damn sense to you. It's basically, again, it's the resolution of years-long plot threads and story arcs. And I think it does a really good job as that.
Right. It revisits a lot of the characters and plot points that we'd seen building up in Uncanny and All New over Brian Bendis' entire run. So we get extended bits with the original 5 X-Men, trying to figure out what they're going to do next. With the in the framing story, essentially an intervention for Older Beast after everything he's done.
There are really only so many times you can break the timeline, or in our parlance, stick your dick into the space-time continuum before there are inevitable consequences.
Right. We see the Rasputins finally move toward reconciliation, and I think most significantly, and the plot point that we and many others had been waiting most for, Iceman talks to Iceman.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about the Cyclops thing, but that too.
That too. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, man. I want to take a minute and talk about the Iceman stuff, because again, reading this issue 2 days after coming out as trans as an adult in my 30s, wow, was I got through the issue without actually falling apart, and then I read Brett White's write-up of it and just like burst into tears about 2 paragraphs in.
Oh man,
we're gonna link that here too because it's so good, and I feel like Brett nails a lot of the points that I want to make here.
Mm-hmm. I'll freely admit I cried when I was reading the scene, which was my lunch break at work, so I tried to keep it subtle. It was a little bit awkward, but totally worth it.
You will not be the first person to burst into tears in an IT department, man.
Very true.
Nor the last. But yeah, man, I love the way it plays out here so much. And again, I know that the original Sea and Iceman coming out in X-Men 40 was really controversial. I really liked that when it came out. I stand by that opinion. This is just going to be links and links and links and links, but I'll link to the article I wrote about that at that point too. But this one hit home in a way that one really didn't, and it's amazingly good. It adds a huge amount of, I think, genuineness and depth to a character who is often written off as superficial and glib and written in those styles without compromising his previous representation. And that's attention to detail and to characterization that I really, really appreciate as a reader. And again, just in context, God, the way that scene played out was really, really tremendous.
Mm-hmm. Of course, your mileage may vary. I'm sure this will be a controversial scene just like the first one was. But yes, for us, it really, really worked.
Well, again, it's one of those things that's so personal and so specific, and that everyone's experience of tends to be so intense that it's really hard not to see your own take on it as definitive.
Absolutely. Now, as for the issue itself, so I've read some criticism of this issue saying that it doesn't really work as the big climactic end of a creator's entire multi-year run of a series, and it's not supposed to be.
Yeah, you can't see me rolling my eyes right now, so you're going to have to trust. You've seen them. You know they're there now.
They at least were a minute ago. I don't
know. That is an excellent point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I like this. I like my eyes existing in a state of quantum uncertainty.
But yeah, what this is to me is it's a denouement. It's taking, the climaxes have already occurred in Uncanny X-Men and an all-new X-Men, and this is just sort of seeing what pieces are on the ground and gently picking them up and reassembling them and getting them ready for the next big thing.
Yeah, this issue isn't about an explosive ending. It's about closure. And that it provides. And speaking of characters and closure, we touched on being kind of baffled at whatever the hell's happened with Cyclops in the 8-month gap in Extraordinary X-Men. And part of that is because of how he's handled here. Cyclops has a good day. Cyclops has a really legitimately, genuinely good day.
I cried at that part
grown-up
too.
Cyclops. Oh God, me too. That was actually the part that hit me hardest when I was reading through this issue. It's lovely. It brings his arc as explored in Uncanny X-Men, and really as explored since the end of Avengers vs. X-Men. So to such an exquisitely good close. It rings really true to the character, to that character's history and legacy, and yeah, it's lovely.
Mm-hmm.
It's really satisfying, and a bunch of you tweeted at us about it, which is always nice.
Yes.
I love how well we have you trained to tweet at us anytime either Peter Corbeau shows up or Cyclops has a good day.
Really, that's the entire reason we started this podcast, just for that.
It's a super specialized alert system.
Basically, yeah. So yeah, this, you can certainly get a fresh start, starting with Extraordinary X-Men and soon the new all-new X-Men and the new Uncanny X-Men. But this right here wraps up the previous era with a perfect bow. So Brian Bendis and all of your various collaborators, well done. We were a little iffy when you first started X-Men, but by the end you have knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, these haven't been perfect runs. This isn't a perfect issue, but it's so good. And I think like the runs that preceded it, it's got way more good than bad, and it brings so much heart and so much attention and so much genuine love for the material and understanding of the characters who drive it that, yeah, it's what I wanted to see. And I think for me, at least, it was very, very much worth the extended wait.
So, a beginning and an ending. Jay, what's our favorite comic this week?
Oh man, I'm kind of surprised you're even asking. It is absolutely and unquestionably Uncanny X-Men number 600. Again, may not be for you, definitely won't be for you if you haven't been following both Uncanny and All New X-Men, but if you have, this is the finale that those series need and deserve.
No question.
with that out of the way, what is our panel of the week? There were a lot of strong ones this time, and I think from both books.
Yeah, I mean, the art is just gorgeous on both of these books, and we had to go back and forth between a bunch of options, but what we settled on was actually this one from Uncanny X-Men number 600. So I'm not a very visual person, and I've really had to train myself since we started doing the podcast to pay attention to how art works and how it informs the story. And so I'm really pleased that I noticed something I don't think I would have a year ago, which is the planes of this panel right here. So we have Cyclops and we have Magneto kind of looking at each other. We have every mutant under the sun gathered in one place below them. And check it out. So they're all below Cyclops. They're all looking up to him. But the line between one of the most important symbols of mutants ever and the other of those symbols, it's completely above them. It's the connection they have, the relationship they have, the dynamic they have is completely separate from Cyclops' role in the mutant revolution or Magneto's history in relation to those mutants. It's just the relationship between two people who have grown into what they are around and because of one another.
No, it goes so far beyond that if you look at it in context of a bit of the dialogue on the next page.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
And that particular contact and the two of them as sort of the bookending symbols of mutants and of mutants in the world.
It is a beautiful scene, and the art sells the hell out of every aspect of it, both narratively and thematically. So there you have it, the beginning of the new era of X-Men.
If you like what you've seen here, please check out our podcast, Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men. New episodes go up every Sunday at rachelandmiles.com, also on iTunes and Stitcher. What have we got for them this week, Miles?
So this week is actually another beginning, albeit one from the 80s, which is the beginning of Louise Simonson's run of New Mutants, the first regular author since Chris Claremont.
Oh god, it's Bird Boy week, isn't it?
It's Bird Boy week. It's a rough start,
okay,
but it's going in good places, so you'll have to kind of bear with New Mutants, and we will endeavor to make that a pleasurable experience with our podcast.
That podcast, these video reviews, and everything at rachelandmiles.com are brought to you by our rad Patreon subscribers. We are an entirely listener-supported and ad-free project, and that happens as a result entirely of those fine folks. If you want to join their ranks, you can do that at the link either above or below the podcast, depending on where you're watching it. The video, not the podcast. It's been a long week.
In the meantime, if you happen to be in or around Las Vegas, we will see you this weekend at Vegas Valley Comics Fest.
We'll be tabling all weekend. We've got a couple panels, including our second ever live episode. We would love it if you wanted to come and be part of that. It's going to be all day on Saturday at Clark County Library. It is an entirely free convention, and it's got a super cool guest lineup, like including us, but the other people are actually much cooler. So you should totally come down and meet us and see us there. We give good high fives.
We do. And whether we see you there or not, we will see you back here next week for more New X Universe. So, you took the glasses off.
I took the glasses off.
Are you going to do that again?
No.